All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're exploring the absolutely fascinating story of a man who literally had everything at his fingertips. I mean, he had every possible reason and opportunity to live a completely wayward, hedonistic life, yet he deliberately chose the hard, magnificent path of strict discipline. We are talking, of course, about Marcus Aurelius and the Stoic ideal. So I want you to start by asking yourself a pretty uncomfortable question. Imagine having infinite wealth, endless pleasure, and absolute, unchecked authority, where your very word is literal law. You could have anything you want, whenever you want it, and absolutely no one could ever tell you no. Under those exact circumstances, with all the external constraints of law and societal expectations completely stripped away, how many of us would honestly fail to disgrace ourselves? We all kind of know how this usually plays out, right? The great English historian Lord Acton hit the nail on the head when he famously noted, "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." It's a rule that nearly every historical leader has proven undeniably true. I mean, think about most of the Roman emperors before and after Marcus. They lived incredibly scandalous lives, completely indulging their appetites, flying into wild rages, and just entirely losing their moral compass the second they tasted real power. But, and this is where it gets mind-blowing, there is one remarkable, standing exception to this historical rule. Marcus Aurelius. He was the absolute ruler of the Roman Empire, a man who essentially owned the entire known Mediterranean world. But in his case, absolute power didn't corrupt absolutely. Instead, it stripped away the facade and revealed the true, rock-solid character of the man underneath. Because there was no external police force making him behave, we know that his goodness came entirely from within. Think about the timeline here. For 19 long years, from 161 to 180 AD, Marcus Aurelius held absolute, unrestrained power over life and death across the entire empire. If he wanted all the money in the world, he could just take it. If he wanted to spend almost 2 decades completely drunk or lost in pleasure, literally no one could stop him. Yet in those 19 years of crushing responsibility and endless temptation, he never once gave in to disgraceful desires. So how on earth did he pull that off? Well, the answer really lies in his mental operating system, his philosophy. Back then, the ancient world was standing at a philosophical crossroads. On one hand, you had Epicureanism, which argued that pleasure is the highest good, and a happy person simply avoids pain at all costs. Marcus actively rejected that. Instead, he went all in on Stoicism, this noble, incredibly demanding belief that moral virtue, having a deeply organized and rational soul, is entirely sufficient for a great human life. He realized, deep down, that we don't actually need endless wealth or pleasure. Virtue is enough. And what's just brilliant about this is how philosophy acts as this ultimate equalizer. In the ancient Roman world, you had 2 of the greatest Stoic thinkers sitting at the complete opposite ends of the social spectrum. You have Epictetus, who was literally born a slave, and Marcus Aurelius, who reigned as emperor. It goes to show that whether you're at the very bottom of the social hierarchy or sitting on the throne of the known world, Stoicism teaches that both of you can attain a disciplined, orderly soul. Nature might deal you the cards of a slave or an emperor, but your only job is to play that hand well and not disgrace your human potential. Okay, so if we want to stop feeling constantly overwhelmed and actually start living with that unshakable virtue of a Roman emperor, we have to adopt the absolute core of this Stoic operating system. And that comes down to separating the entire world into 2 very distinct categories. A truly philosophical person takes utter, uncompromising moral responsibility for their own mind, their will, their intentions, and their actions. Notice that these are the only things strictly in our control. On the flip side, you have literally everything else. The weather, whether a leaky ship actually makes it to port, catching a cold, what your coworkers think of you, and yes, even death. The Stoic takes total responsibility for their own choices and remains entirely indifferent to the rest. Not because they're cold or don't care, but because worrying about tomorrow is totally useless when tomorrow isn't up to you. Now, we get a front row seat to the intense reality of this daily struggle in his famous work, Meditations. A lot of scholars consider this to be one of the loneliest books ever written. It's shot through with this profound melancholy. Actually, scratch that, it wasn't even meant to be a book. It was just his private diary, a manuscript he never, ever intended for publication. He actually wanted it burned after he died. Reading it feels almost like we're voyeurs, trespassing on the innermost thoughts of a man trying desperately to hold himself together. He wrote these harsh moral maxims to himself because, in a very real sense, he was the loneliest guy in the world. Being emperor meant he had no equals, which meant he had no true, honest friends. He spent his days in the throne room, surrounded by self-centered sycophants, constantly wanting favors, begging for money, or just complaining. He had to constantly write these short, private reminders to himself, like, "Soon you will have forgotten all things, and soon all things will have forgotten you," just to stop himself from losing his temper with the corrupt, petty people he had to deal with every single day. But despite that massive, crushing burden, because he cultivated such an orderly soul, he totally embodied what the Stoics called the cosmopolitan ideal. To be cosmopolitan meant you were a citizen of the cosmos. For Marcus, his true polis, his city-state, was the universe itself. Because he lived consistently with nature and human reason, he was perfectly at home anywhere. He would have been exactly as content locked inside a tiny damp jail cell as he was commanding armies as a Roman emperor. Because external facts simply don't dictate your internal peace. He actually wrote in his diary, and I love this, "Even in a palace, it is possible to live well." Just think about the weight of that for a second. That simple epigram leaves us with absolutely zero excuses. If he could maintain pure virtue, ruthless self-discipline, and deep morality while literally drowning in the endless, intoxicating temptations of a Roman palace with no one to hold him accountable, what possible excuse do we have for our own everyday moral failings? So the big question is, how do we actually apply this ancient Roman operating system to our crazy, super busy modern lives today? Because look, Stoicism isn't just some dry historical curiosity. It is a highly practical, concrete tool designed for serious people who want to navigate the absolute chaos of modern life without emotionally falling apart. When we put Marcus's empire-level temptations side by side with our own tiny, everyday urges, well, it puts things in pretty sharp perspective. We get tempted to scream and lose our temper in traffic, to cheat just a little bit on our taxes, to hold petty grudges, or freak out about our internet speed. Marcus Aurelius serves as a massive standing reproach to our modern self-indulgence. If he could hold the power of life and death over millions and consistently choose the moral high ground without whining, we can for sure govern our tempers during a busy morning commute. So we can start applying this wisdom right now with a sort of modern Stoic checklist. First, stop complaining. Literally, just stop. If a problem is out of your control, complaining is a complete waste of energy. If it is in your control, then go fix it. Second, return benefits for harm. When you deal with difficult, foolish people, treat them with patience because they honestly don't know any better. Third, accept illness and misfortune gracefully as just natural parts of the ride. And finally, govern your own intentions ruthlessly. By choosing rationality over impulse, you're choosing to be fully, truly free. Ultimately, what Marcus Aurelius reminds us is that pain, sickness, death, these are just natural parts of the human condition that every single one of us is going to have to face. You cannot control the fact that you will experience hardship, and you absolutely cannot control the fact that you will eventually die. But you have 100% control over how you respond to those inevitable facts, which leaves us with one final, incredibly challenging question to take home today. All men die, but will you die whining?